I tested the Amazfit Active 2 to see if its heart rate, steps, GPS, and sleep data are any accurate. This video is not sponsored. I didn't even get this gifted. I just went and bought it online the old-fashioned way. At the beginning of the year, I got the Whoop 4.0, and while I've been loving it, and it's even helped me lose over 15 pounds, I got it with the promise that by paying the subscription, I would get any new devices for free. So with the new device rollout that they did, where they reversed that policy and didn't give out the new devices for free, I thought maybe I'll look around a little bit. And then I came across the Amazfit Active 2, and coming in at under $100, which is just so much cheaper, no recurring subscription, I want to use my skills as a former data analyst to see, is the tracking data that this thing spits off any accurate? So let's jump into all of the data, and by the end of the video, I'll let you know if I think the Amazfit Active 2 is worth getting or not. Let's start with the heart rate data test. So I tested the heart rate data coming from the Amazfit Active 2 across 4 different exercises: indoor riding, outdoor running, weights, and indoor rowing. I did this because some exercises are harder to measure accurate heart rate than others, so by doing a bunch, we could get a good idea of it. In order to tell if the Amazfit Active 2's heart rate data was accurate while I was doing these activities, I was also wearing my Polar H10 chest strap, which is widely regarded as the gold standard of heart rate data measurement. This means that in any given second of the workout, we can say what the Polar is saying my heart rate is and what the Amazfit Active 2 is saying my heart rate is, and we can see if the Amazfit Active 2 is accurate or not. During each of the cardio-based activities, I did the same workout to look at different types of measurements that heart rate could be getting. So I started off with about a 10-minute warm-up, then I did 3 1-minute intervals, then I did 3 30-second intervals where I'd go even harder for a shorter period of time, followed by ending with steady state zone 2 heart rate cardio, which basically means just like a steady, moderate effort, to see if the Amazfit Active 2 would do better or worse measuring different types of effort within an activity. As we go through the data, we're going to start with the activity that's easiest to measure the heart rate of, which would be indoor riding, and move and progress to harder and harder activities to measure. At the end of each activity, I'll give the Amazfit Active 2's heart rate data an accuracy score out of 10. 1 out of 10 being bad, 10 out of 10 being good. In order to determine if the data was accurate or not, I'll be using a statistical tool called Lens Concordance Correlation Coefficient. If you don't know what any of that means, don't worry. You'll see as we go and actually look through the different lines in the data how accurate it was or not. All right, so let's jump into the data here. So here we've got the Amazfit Active 2. And as you can see, we have the 4 different modalities: indoor riding, outdoor running, weight training, and indoor rowing. And for each of them, I'm going to give them a score out of 10 for how accurate their heart rate measurement is. And then there's also the Lens Concordance Correlation Coefficient number for all the nerds. And also for the stat people, here is how I'm going to create the rating out of 10. But for everyone else who doesn't know that, totally fine. Okay, so here we have a heart rate graph. It is blurred out right now, but what we're going to see is 2 different lines. One line shows the Polar heart rate data, and the other is going to show the Amazfit heart rate data. So here you got the Amazfit, here you've got the Polar, and this is for indoor riding. Along the x-axis, you have the time of day during the workout, and along the y-axis, you have the heart rate that was measured by each of the 2 devices. And here we've got the warm-up section, which we're going to take a look at. We've got the 1-minute intervals. We've got the 30-second intervals, which are even more effort, but maybe harder to measure. And then we have the steady state, kind of moderate pace zone 2 at the end. And we also have the overall score of the entire indoor ride. So looking at the warm-up data, we have the black line representing the Polar H10 heart rate measurements throughout this phase, and we have the red line representing the Amazfit Active 2. So just as an example, if you look at any point on the line, we see here, when it was 7:30 a.m. during this workout, the Polar H10 measured a heart rate of about 97, and the Amazfit Active 2 measured a heart rate of around 90. So in this case, the Amazfit Active 2 is measuring a heart rate much lower than what's likely actually going on. So that's how you interpret this graph. The better the lines are close to each other, that means it's more accurate. The further away they are from each other, the less accurate it is. And as you can see at the start of the warm-up, there's a really big miss. It looks like the Amazfit Active 2 is really under-reporting the heart rate that's actually going on. But after that initial part, it seems to be doing a bit better. As you can see, the red line is following the black line a lot better. Some lag here when the heart rate drops a little bit, dropped way too low on the Amazfit Active 2. And again, not really capturing the peaks of the heart rate or the drops in the heart rate. But, and you know, here's a little bit where there's some lag. It looks like the Amazfit Active 2 is keeping up, but a little bit delayed from when the Polar H10 is measuring it. And we see the same sort of thing where the Amazfit Active 2 looks like it dropped signal for a little bit, didn't capture this peak, but then relatively mimics the heart rate moving forward. So overall, you know, not the best during the warm up. It's getting a 2 out of 10 for accuracy here. And here are some fancy correlation graphs for the statistics people to take a look at. You can pause your screen and look at them if you want. Next, we have the 1 minute intervals. So I went up, you know, harder for 1 minute and then a bit easier for 1 minute. And as you can see, the Amazfit Active 2 actually did really, really well here. So there's a little bit of a miss at the beginning here, but after that, it's tracking almost exactly the black line. The red line of the Amazfit Active 2 is capturing the peaks. It's capturing when it comes back down. It's capturing when it goes back up. This is really, really good. So during the 1 minute intervals, the Amazfit Active 2 is getting a 9 out of 10 for accuracy, which is actually like pretty surprising. And here are your correlation graphs. Next, we have the 30-second intervals. So these could, in theory, be a bit harder to measure because I'm going up and down in effort a lot faster. But you can see as this heart rate climbs up to like around 50, 55 heart rate range, the Amazfit Active 2, the red line, is perfectly following the heart rate measurement, pretty perfect anyway, of the Polar H10. It's capturing when it goes down, then back up for 30 seconds, down for 30 seconds, back up for 30 seconds. Here looks like a bit of a miss. The Amazfit Active 2, maybe by 2 or 3 heart rates, is saying it's recording a higher measure than it should. But overall, did a really, really good job here of measuring the 30-second intervals. This is another 9 out of 10 for accuracy. Next, we have at the end of the indoor ride, the steady state zone 2. So you can see the Amazfit Active 2, again, doing another good job. As you can see in the steady state, my heart rate range was more around the 130 to 138. And the Amazfit Active 2, maybe a little bit of lag in certain sections of this portion of the workout, but overall doing a really solid job of tracking along the Polar H10's data. So it's getting an 8 out of 10 in this section. So overall, indoor ride, this was that blurred graph that I had at the beginning. Now you can see the entire thing at once if you want to take a look. I'm giving the Amazfit Active 2 a score of 9 out of 10. It did an amazing job at measuring heart rate accurately on indoor ride. Now, indoor ride is typically the easiest one to measure because, you know, you're inside, your arms aren't moving around much, you're in a fixed position. It's just really easy to capture data accurately. But as we progress through, it's going to get more and more difficult. And here we have the summary view, Amazfit Active 2, stationary bike, 9 out of 10. Next, let's move to outdoor running. So for outdoor running, we have the same sort of test going on here. We have a warm-up period, some 1 minute intervals, 30-second intervals, and steady state zone 2, and our overall score for outdoor running. So first, let's start with the warm-up. The warm-up, huge miss. So although the Amazfit Active 2 is, you know, really good from if you were to use like a Pearson's correlation where it's just tracking along the line pretty well, it's off by about, how does this even look like, 20 beats per minute? So for example, at 647-ish, the Polar H10 is saying during the warm-up phase of this outdoor run, I was around 110 heart rate. Amazfit Active 2 is saying I'm around 142. So that's just a complete miss altogether. It really disappointing here. It's getting a 3 out of 10 on the warm-up. And here you have that correlation where you see it's like not the worst correlation, it's positively correlated, but it's way off from what the line should be for perfect accuracy. Next, we have the 1 minute intervals. Whereas it did a pretty good job of measuring them during the stationary bike, it is another big miss. So here's an example. We have during one of the intervals, the Amazfit Active 2 is actually under measuring this time. So it's saying I'm at around a 165 heart rate when my heart rate was actually around 175. So it was overestimating the warm-up, and now it's underestimating the 1 minute intervals. So not a great look here. This is getting a 2 out of 10. And now during the more intense 30-second intervals, we can see again another big undercount. We see the Amazfit Active 2 is off by about 10 to 15 beats per minute at each given second of the workout. So if I were looking at Amazfit Active 2, it's saying, hey, you're getting 150, but in reality, I'm going really hard. I'm getting 175 on some of these peaks on the 30 seconds. So disappointing to see these results. It's getting a 1 out of 10 on the harder to measure 30-second intervals. And lastly, we come to that steady state heart rate zone 2 moderate effort. And we can see in these lower heart rates, a big miss at the beginning here. It's kind of tracking along better. And as we settle into the steady state, it had a good little run here. The red line tracking the black line pretty well. But then again, as the heart rate comes up a little bit, the Amazfit Active 2, it responds late. You can see the peak comes later than the Polar H10 and it undercounts as well. So another big miss in steady state zone 2. This is a 2 out of 10. So overall, the outdoor run as a whole, this is the entire workout now, unblurred. We can see that really big miss in the warm up, missing the peaks of the 1 minute, missing the peaks of the 30 seconds, and not doing the best, a little laggy, and missing some peaks on the steady state at the end. So outdoor run, after the amazing indoor run score, is getting a 3 out of 10. Not so amazing. And there's reasons for this. When you're outside, maybe your arms are moving around a bit more. Maybe the wearable on your wrist is sliding and not measuring as well. Maybe it's touching clothing. So there's reasons for why it's more difficult, but 3 out of 10, not going to work. Now let's move on to the next one. The next most challenging would be weights. So weights is really hard to measure with wearables typically, especially on your wrist, because they don't catch the spikes when you're actually like lifting the weights up. But let's see how the Amazfit Active 2 does with weights. So this is the entire weight workout I did, a legs day. And, it's pretty tough to see in this zoomed out view. So let's zoom into the middle portion of the workout. So when we zoom into the middle 20-ish minutes of this workout, we can see the Amazfit does a pretty good job of tracking here. It catches a weird spike here when the Polar doesn't. Tracks actually really well along here. And again, it's missing the dips. That's probably when I'm coming down from an exercise. The Amazfit's not capturing that. A little bit of a lag here. And as we come along, again, it misses the big dip. Tracking really well through here. Tracking, and then here it's just a big miss. It's kind of just generalizing. It catches this big spike and then tracks. So what I'm seeing here is that it's actually doing a surprisingly good job at capturing the spikes when I'm doing the exercise, but it's not doing the best job at capturing when we have these dips in between the efforts. Going back to the completely zoomed out view, weight training, heart rate data accuracy, we are getting a 6 out of 10. Not great, but not terrible. And definitely better than outdoor running. And lastly, we have the hardest one to measure during the activities that I did, which was the indoor row. So one thing I noticed about this indoor row data is that I actually think the Polar H10 chest strap was having difficulty, because I did the same workout, warm up, then 1 minute intervals, then 30-second intervals, then steady state zone 2. And if we look at the 1 minute intervals for a second here, you can see the Amazfit is capturing these 1 minute intervals, but the Polar is like, it disconnected for a while, then has this big drop, which is strange, another disconnection, this huge dip for no reason. And again, the 30-second intervals, the Amazfit is capturing them first, and the Polar is actually capturing them second. I have a working theory for this. I think that with it being a chest strap, when you're on a rowing machine and your upper body is maybe crouching, bending back and forth, maybe the chest strap is coming off of the chest a little bit and giving the Polar H10 some difficulty in measuring. But I also would have thought that it would have caused some problems for the Amazfit Active 2, because as you're straining on your wrist where the Amazfit is, I would have thought that that would have created some trouble in the measurement. And while it's tough to say from this graph, I'd say the Amazfit Active 2 actually seems to have done maybe a better job than the Polar, except for, I don't know what's going on here, but from what I remember this workout, I think the Amazfit Active 2 actually did a good job. I think the Polar H10 had some trouble. So I am going to give this a score of 6 out of 10, but I'm putting an asterisk because the Polar H10 had some trouble with this one individual workout. So overall, here are your scores for the Amazfit Active 2. And it actually did surprisingly well on indoor cycling, kind of not really bad actually on outdoor run, and not too bad on the other two. Now, this, for a $100 device doesn't seem too bad, but how does this compare to maybe a more popular or more high-end device? Well, while I was doing these tests, I actually was wearing the Whoop 4.0 on my left wrist the entire time. So I had the Amazfit on my right wrist, I had the Whoop 4.0 on my left wrist, and I had the Polar H10 chest strap. So let's take a quick look and see how the Whoop performed for heart rate data and see if it was any better or worse than what the Amazfit did. Here we have the 4 graphs. We have indoor cycling that I did. And as you can see, the Whoop does really well here as well. The running, Whoop maybe struggling a little bit. The weights, again, maybe similar to how the Amazfit's doing. And for rowing, again, the Whoop kind of disagreeing with the Polar H10, which might have had some trouble. But let's actually jump into the numbers and see which was better. Here's all of our Amazfit numbers. And here are our Whoop numbers. So if we go along here, it's actually a bit of an edge for the Amazfit Active 2 on the indoor cycling, which is amazing. For the running, outdoor run, we have Whoop beating the Amazfit Active 2. For weight training, it looks like the Amazfit did a better job of measuring the accurate heart rate on that. And for rowing with the asterisk, it's going to the Whoop. So the fact that the Amazfit 2 actually beat the Whoop 4.0 on 2 out of the 4 tests when it's so much more expensive and so much more popular, I'm really surprised by that. Like, great. Even though the numbers are kind of for the Amazfit Active 2, like beating Whoop is actually really good. Now let's look at step counting. So in order to tell if the Amazfit Active 2 is accurate at counting steps, I decided to do a 500 step test on the treadmill. I was walking at a fairly normal speed like I would off of the treadmill, and I made sure that my arms were moving to mimic as if I was walking normally. So I didn't have them resting and still on the machine, they were swaying back and forth. And to see just how good the Amazfit Active 2 would do compared to others, I decided to also wear the Whoop 4.0 on my left wrist. I had the Amazfit Active 2 on my right wrist, and I had my iPhone 15 in my pocket, which also counts steps. So here are the screenshots of my steps before and after. This is hard to read, but I just want to show you this for proof that I actually did the test. And when we look at the actual step counts themselves, here we have the actual step count of 500. We see the iPhone 15 counted 600 steps. Not bad. Not great, but not bad. That's off by about 20% over. Then we have the Whoop 4.0 that did 251 steps. So that's about 50% off. Really bad stuff. And then we have the, unfortunately, Amazfit Active 2, which got 134 steps. So off by 73% less. So this is a bit of a failure in my opinion. And as someone who loves to walk steps, I like to do 10,000 steps a day. It's a bit disappointing to see that this is how it's counting them. Now let's look at sleep. So I don't have a gold standard device like the Polar H10 for heart rate data for measuring sleep, but what I do have is my Whoop 4.0, which is widely regarded as being great for helping people measure and improve their sleep. So I wore both devices for a night, the Whoop on my left wrist, the Amazfit Active 2 on my right. Let's take a look at my different sleep stages during the night, how long I was sleeping, things like that, and see if the Amazfit Active 2 was any good in relative comparison to the Whoop 4.0. So looking at the sleep data, here we can look at a comparison between how long the Whoop and the Amazfit Active 2 measured my sleep for, like how long was I sleeping and how much time did I spend in the different stages. So we can see here the Whoop was saying I slept for 7 hours and 16 minutes versus the Amazfit Active 2 said 7:23. So pretty close. And if you look at different stages of sleep, you can see that the REM sleep on the Amazfit Active 2 is saying 14% versus 18% REM sleep on the Whoop, and deep sleep 25% on the Whoop versus 14% on the Amazfit Active 2. So we do see some disagreement between the different amounts of sleep, but in terms of quantity of sleep, and these are just set automatically by these devices, I don't put a start and stop date in, they're actually pretty close, which is, in my opinion, a pretty good sign for the Amazfit Active 2. And here I have stacked up the different stages of sleep. So this graph here comes from the Amazfit Active 2, and this graph down here comes from the Whoop. And so this is the start of the sleep, and this is the end of the sleep. So each different row here, ignore the lines, but if you look at the bars, we have the different types of sleep that you're in: deep, light, and REM sleep, and awake. And on the Whoop, we have awake, light, deep, and REM sleep. So if we look at awake, we see that both devices caught a little bit of an awake moment here in the middle of the night. But, you know, the Whoop is saying I was awake later in the night, and the Amazfit Active 2 didn't capture that. If we look at light sleep, we don't see much agreement between the two devices. I mean, here is where the Amazfit was saying there was light sleep. Whoop was saying there was some big disagreement in this middle section. And near the end, of course, Amazfit's recording a really big session of light sleep. So is the Whoop. So this end portion here actually doing pretty well for the Amazfit in terms of agreement between the two. If we move on to deep sleep, we can see that both of them are actually okay with measuring deep sleep. The Whoop is saying there's deep sleep at the beginning of the night. So does the Amazfit. Another chunk here. Again, Amazfit saying the same. Another chunk here. Amazfit saying the same. It's not capturing. The Amazfit said I had a deep sleep moment in this part of the later night. Whoop saying I didn't. And then Whoop saying there was another one right before I woke up, and the Amazfit's not capturing that. So some pretty solid disagreement between the two. And then lastly, if we look at REM sleep, we can see that the REM sleep is almost completely different. This big chunk of REM sleep here is captured in both devices, but this is different from the Whoop. This is different from the Whoop. Whoop and Amazfit are both capturing this. So again, some disagreement. So overall for sleep, it looks like it did an okay job, at least in measuring quantity of sleep, but it seems like in the different sleep stages, there's a good amount of disagreement between the Whoop 4.0 and the Amazfit Active 2. Now let's look at the GPS data. So on that outdoor run that we previously looked for the data for, I was wearing my Amazfit Active 2, of course, which has GPS tracking built within it, as well as I had my iPhone 15 on me, which also does GPS tracking. So let's pull in the GPS data from both devices and see, was the Amazfit Active 2 any accurate? I also remember the route I ran, so we can see if it relatively lines up with where I was going. I also made sure that I was running with a clear open sky. I was right by the lake, and so there won't be any obstructions that would mess with the GPS data. So here we have the GPS data, and the black line represents the iPhone 15's GPS recording, and the orangish red kind of highlight is from the Amazfit Active 2. And I also remember how I went on this run so we can see. So as we go along here, we can see, okay, a bit of a difference here where the iPhone 15 correctly showed the path that I went on versus the Amazfit Active 2 kind of had a bit of a dip, but not a big deal. And as we come along here on both sides of the loop there and back, the Amazfit Active 2, a little bit of a miss here, but overall very, very close as we go along the waterfront here. And we can see the Amazfit Active 2 and the iPhone 15 really well connected throughout the entire run. So overall, it looks like the Amazfit Active 2, the GPS, maybe a tiny bit of a miss here and there. Maybe on this part here, we've got the different places that I went, and we can see that the iPhone 15, a little bit of a different path, a bit more accurate than the Amazfit Active 2, but very, very close, like within, I don't know, within 5 meters of accuracy of each other. So I'll take that. That's pretty good. Now it's time for Calvin's Is It Any Good score. So I'm going to let you know now if I think the Amazfit Active 2 is any good. The way this is quantified is by looking at a few different measures: comfort level, data accuracy, ease of use, visual design, and value. At the end, we'll add that all up and see how it scored. In terms of comfort level, I have a few complaints. One is that the wristband itself, I'm not a materials expert, but this sort of rubbery plastic material I've found on watches that I've had in the past always tends to crack super early. And it doesn't look like these bands are replaceable. So if I wear this and it cracks, boom, I'm out $100, and I don't like that. In fact, I have this exact same watch. You can see it right here. And as you might notice, the top of it's missing. Well, that's because I was moving stuff around one day and it got caught in something and it cracked, and now the watch is fairly useless other than just something I keep on my desk, which is fine because it's a cheap Amazon watch. But if it was like a $100 smartwatch, not fine, not cool. Another problem I have with the band is that my wrist size is perfectly in between whatever sort of comfort level I could get from this thing. So what I mean by that is when I make the band tighter by putting it through one hole, it's too tight on my wrist. Then if I move it to the next hole to make it looser, it's too loose on my wrist. So it's never comfortable on my wrist. As well, the circular hard watch design, it just doesn't really hug my wrist at all. It feels bulky and uncomfortable. I mean, if I compare that to my Whoop 4.0, as you can see I'm wearing right now, this thing has a nice curved design that almost like hugs my wrist, and it just is 10 times better for comfort and feel. I can always notice, and it's a little bit uncomfortable when I'm wearing my Amazfit Active 2, but the Whoop, it just blends in the background like nothing. Comfort level, I'm giving it a 3 out of 10. Data quality. So for the heart rate data, it did a great job on indoor riding, but it was kind of mid on the other different activities. The steps was an absolute disaster. It was way off, but the sleep looked pretty good, and the GPS data was definitely good. So for data accuracy, I'm giving it a 6 out of 10. For ease of use, it's pretty easy and straightforward to use. It's using a pretty standard watch operating system, and the app itself is pretty good. You know, not as good as the Whoop app that's super detailed, but it gets you the basics, and it actually gives you quite a bit considering there's no subscription. The battery life on this thing is also insane. I've been wearing it for a week and a half now, I think, and I only charged it once. It was actually the first time when I already got it and it was like 50%. Then I charged it up to 100%. Since then, it's still above right now, like what, like above 50%, 67% right now. So the battery life is insane. I mean, the Whoop, I got to charge every 3 days or so, but this thing is amazing. The one thing that I really disliked though is that I'd get these notifications and they give me the most pointless things. Like I'll be walking at my walking pad at my desk and I'll say, hey, you've been sitting for a while. Why don't you go walk? Like I'm walking, or I'll be going to sleep and then it'll buzz my wrist as I'm going to sleep saying, hey, it's time to get to bed. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to sleep. And I don't know if it's probably a way to disable notifications. It was kind of hard to find that if there is. So overall, I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. For visual design, I really like the way it looks on my wrist. Now the band's uncomfortable, but it looks cool. I like that black color along with that silver circular color around the watch itself. It just looks very sleek, very clean. But I don't know if this is something that just comes with wearing a Whoop all the time, but I hate that it's just this big black empty circle on my wrist all the time. It just looks like a dark void on my wrist when I'm not engaging with it. So that part I don't really like. So for visual design, it's a 6 out of 10. Now for value, considering you're getting pretty decent health tracking data coming off of this thing, a design that looks good, maybe it's a bit uncomfortable, but that's only if you wear it all day. If you wear it just for exercise, I think it's perfectly fine. Very easy to use. Battery lasts a long time. And with no subscription and coming in under $100 US, I'm giving value on this a 9 out of 10. This gives an overall score of 31 out of 50. If there's another fitness tracking device you'd like to see me review, please let me know in the comments. I'm Calvin Caracciolo. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.